Hello and welcome. Tonight we travel back 2,000 years to spend a quiet evening in ancient Rome. Not the Rome of gladiator battles or powerful emperors, but the calmer Rome that slowly appears after the sun goes down. The last golden light fades over the rooftops. Shops begin to close. Fresh bread comes out of hot ovens, and thousands of oil lamps start glowing in the windows. Some Romans are heading home for simple dinners of bread and olives. Others are preparing for long dinner, parties filled with wine, music, and sometimes very unusual food. And if you were living here 2,000 years ago, your evening might include relaxing in a crowded bathhouse, listening to gossip in a noisy tavern, or walking through dark streets lit only by flickering torches. Because when the Roman workday ended, the real life of the city was just beginning. So tonight, let's take a slow walk through ancient Rome and discover how Romans truly spent their evenings. You walk down a dusty road leading into the heart of the city. Around you, other Romans are doing exactly the same thing. They are heading home. Some walk alone, their sandals tapping against stone. Others move in small groups, laughing and talking about the day. A tired blacksmith wipes soot from his hands. A merchant carefully counts coins in a small pouch. A pair of children chase each other through the street, ignoring the annoyed looks of adults trying not to trip over them. This is the evening hour when Rome changes personality. During the day, the city is loud and frantic. Markets roar with energy. Wagons and carts fight for space in the streets, but evening brings something softer. The pace slows, voices become calmer, and the city begins preparing for rest. Now, historically speaking, Romans did not usually eat their main meal in the middle of the day, like many modern cultures do. Their largest meal, called cena, was typically eaten in the evening. This was one of the most important daily rituals in Roman life. For wealthy Romans, dinner could last for hours. Guests would recline on couches, servants would bring course after course of food, and conversations could stretch deep into the night. But for the majority of Romans, as the ordinary workers, dinner was far simpler. Bread, vegetables, olives, maybe cheese, sometimes fish. Meat was more rare for poorer households, though not impossible. Scholars still argue whether the typical Roman worker ate mostly vegetables and grains, or if meat appeared more often than we once believed. But no matter what was on the menu, evening meals were about something more important than food. They were about finally stopping, finally sitting, finally breathing after a long day of labor. The last glow of sunlight fades behind the hills, and the warmth of the day slowly releases its grip on the city. You keep walking. Around you, Rome is shifting into that gentle in-between moment. Not quite day anymore, but not fully night either. The sky above the rooftops deepens into soft shades of violet and dark blue, while the narrow streets below are still filled with the movement of people finishing their day. For most Romans, this is the moment they have been waiting for since early morning, because the workday is finally ending. You pass a row of small shops squeezed tightly together along the street. Their doors stand open, but only for a little longer. A shoemaker sits on a low stool outside his workshop. His fingers move quickly, tying the last knot on a leather sandal before handing it to a waiting customer. The customer pays with a few small bronze coins, nods politely, and disappears into the slowly thinning crowd. Inside the shop, the shoemaker stretches his back and exhales. The day is done. Nearby, a potter carefully stacks clay bowls onto a wooden shelf. A thin layer of dust coats his hands and tunic. All day he has shaped wet clay into cups, plates, and storage jars. Now the kiln beside the shop glows faintly as the final pieces harden in the evening heat. Across the street, a cloth merchant folds bright pieces of fabric, deep reds, soft yellows, faded blues, and places them inside a wooden chest. The fabrics smell faintly of dye and wool. One by one, the shops begin closing. Wooden shutters swing down, iron locks click into place, canvas awnings are rolled up and tied with rope. The great markets of Rome that roared with noise only a few hours ago are slowly quieting. But the streets themselves are still very much alive. You notice that many people are now walking in the same direction. Home. Roman homes varied wildly depending on wealth. The richest families lived in spacious houses called domus, elegant homes built around open courtyards and decorated with mosaics, painted walls and small gardens. But most people lived in tall apartment buildings known as insulae. If you look up, you can see them rising above the street like stacked boxes. Some are 4 or 5 stories tall. Wooden balconies lean outward, laundry hangs from ropes, and narrow staircases twist upward inside. These buildings were crowded, very crowded. Historians believe that thousands of ordinary Romans lived inside these apartments. A single building might hold dozens of families. The lower floors were usually the most desirable, while the upper levels were cheaper and often less stable. In fact, collapsing apartment buildings were a real concern in ancient Rome. Fire was another danger. Many apartments were built partly from wood, and with oil lamps used for lighting, accidents could spread quickly. Because of this, the city eventually created organized night patrols to watch for fires. Scholars still argue whether these early fire brigades were truly effective or mostly symbolic, but their presence shows how seriously the Romans took the risks of urban life. You turn down a narrower street, and the sounds change again. Instead of loud bargaining from markets, you now hear smaller, more personal sounds. A door creaks open, someone laughs from a window above. Footsteps echo softly against stone walls. A woman carrying a basket of vegetables pauses to greet a neighbor. They exchange a few quick sentences, probably discussing the price of grain, or maybe complaining about a landlord. Daily Roman life often revolved around these small interactions. Without television, phones, or modern entertainment, people talked to each other constantly. Conversation was one of the great evening activities of the ancient world. Ahead of you, 2 young men walk side by side, arguing about something with dramatic gestures. One points toward the forum in the distance, while the other shakes his head stubbornly. Politics again? Rome's citizens were famously passionate about public life. Even ordinary workers often had strong opinions about leaders, laws, and public decisions. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, created a culture where political discussion was almost a daily sport. And, like any good sport, it often involved a lot of shouting. You continue moving through the neighborhood, and a familiar smell drifts through the air. Bread. Warm bread. A bakery near the corner is finishing its final batch of the day. Inside, a baker uses a long wooden paddle to pull round loaves from a hot stone oven. The crusts crackle softly as they cool. This is not unusual. Bread was the foundation of the Roman diet. In fact, the Roman government sometimes provided grain to citizens through a system known as the grain dole. This program helped feed large numbers of people living in the city, especially poorer families. Without it, historians believe the population of Rome might have struggled to survive at such massive numbers. You watch as a young boy runs out of the bakery carrying a loaf almost as big as his arm. He holds it carefully, trying not to drop it as he disappears into a nearby doorway. Dinner will begin soon in many homes, but the evening routine involves more than just eating. You begin noticing something interesting. Some people are not going home yet. Instead, they are heading toward a large building farther down the street. You follow the direction of the crowd and soon see the structure rising ahead. Tall stone walls, wide entrance, and faint steam drifting into the evening air. The public baths. Bathhouses were one of the most important social spaces in Roman life. For many citizens, the baths were a daily ritual, a place to wash, relax, exercise, and most importantly, talk. Lots of talking. The baths were open to people from many different social classes, and entry fees were usually very small. This meant that workers finishing their day could stop by for a soak before heading home for dinner. Inside, visitors would move through several different rooms. First came the apoditerium, the changing room where clothes were stored, then the tepidarium, a warm room that prepared the body for hotter temperatures. After that came the famous caldarium, filled with steam and hot water. And finally, the frigidarium, a cold pool that shocked the body back to alertness. It may sound like a spa day, and in many ways, when it was, Romans took bathing very seriously. In fact, some bath complexes were enormous, almost like small cities. The baths of Caracalla, for example, could hold thousands of visitors at once. As you watch people entering the bathhouse, you hear laughter echo from inside. Someone splashes water. Someone else tells a story loud enough for half the room to hear. Bathhouses were not quiet places. They were social theatres. Deals were discussed. Rumours were shared. Friendships were strengthened. And occasionally, arguments broke out over politics, sports teams, or who had cheated during a game of dice. But not everyone goes to the baths tonight. Some people continue home. Others stop by taverns, and many families are already beginning the preparations for dinner. The sky above is darker now. The first oil lamps flicker to life in windows. Their small flames glow softly behind wooden shutters, turning the streets into long corridors of warm golden light. Rome is settling into evening, but the night has only begun, and the most interesting gatherings of the Roman world are just about to start. The streets grow even busier for a while before they finally begin to quiet. You continue walking through Rome as the evening deepens, and it becomes clear that sunset doesn't mean the city suddenly goes still. In fact, this short window after the workday often feels like the most alive moment of all, because everyone is outside. Workers who spent the day indoors finally step into the open air. Merchants, who stood behind market stalls all afternoon now, wander freely through the streets. Families gather near doorways, catching the last comfortable breeze before night settles over the city. You pass a narrow intersection where 4 streets meet. Here, a small fountain trickles constantly. Water splashes into a stone basin worn smooth by decades of use. Several people stand nearby, filling clay jars and metal buckets. Public fountains like this are everywhere in Rome. The city is famous for its aqueducts, massive stone channels that carry fresh water from distant hills straight into the city. Some of these aqueducts stretch for dozens of miles across the countryside. It is one of Rome's greatest engineering achievements. Water flows continuously through pipes and channels, supplying baths, fountains, and wealthy homes for ordinary citizens living in crowded apartment buildings. These fountains are often the main source of water for drinking, cooking, and washing. You watch as a woman balances a large clay jar on her hip while filling another with water. Beside her, a teenage boy struggles to lift a bucket that may be slightly too heavy for him. Nearby, 2 older men lean against the fountain wall and talk quietly. The conversation sounds serious. One man gestures toward the center of the city, probably the Forum, while the other nods slowly. Romans have a word for this type of evening conversation: gossip. Actually, Romans loved gossip so much that it sometimes spread faster than official news. Rumors about politicians, generals, or scandals in wealthy households often traveled through the city simply by people talking in places like this. Scholars still argue whether gossip played a larger role in Roman politics than official speeches, but there is little doubt that everyday conversation helped shape public opinion, and judging by the animated voices around you, the tradition is alive and well tonight. A little farther down the street, a group of children has claimed a small open space between buildings. They shout happily while throwing small stones at a chalk circle drawn on the ground. It's a game. Roman children played many simple street games like this. Dice, knucklebones, spinning tops, and chasing games were all common ways to pass time after school or chores. One boy misses his throw completely and the other children explode into laughter. He protests loudly, claiming the stone slipped. Nobody believes him. Even in ancient Rome, kids are still kids. As you continue walking, the crowd grows denser again. The main street ahead is wide enough for carts and wagons, and the last deliveries of the day are still being made. A donkey cart rattles past you, its wooden wheels clattering loudly against the stone road. The driver looks tired but focused as he steers carefully between pedestrians. Transportation inside Rome is actually more complicated than it might appear. During the daytime, heavy carts were often restricted from entering certain parts of the city because the streets became too crowded with people because of this. Many deliveries happen later in the evening or even during the night, which means the quiet of Roman nights was often broken by the noise of wagon wheels echoing through the streets. The poet Juvenal once complained about this very thing, describing how impossible it could be to sleep with carts rumbling past outside your window. So if you imagine Rome as a perfectly peaceful sleeping city, well, that might not be entirely accurate. You turn into another street where the buildings lean so close together that the sky above becomes a narrow strip of deep blue. Here the smells change again. Cooking from several windows above, warm scents drift downward into the street, garlic sizzling in oil, fresh bread torn into pieces, fish roasting over small charcoal fires. Inside many homes, dinner preparations are now well underway. For ordinary families, the evening meal is usually simple, but satisfying. A wooden table may hold bowls of lentils, bread dipped in olive oil, and perhaps a small dish of vegetables or cheese. Wine is often mixed with water and shared among the adults. Children sit nearby, sometimes impatiently waiting for their portion. Unlike wealthy Romans, most families eat sitting upright at simple tables rather than reclining on couches. Their homes are smaller, their meals shorter, and their routines more practical, but the atmosphere is warm. The evening meal is one of the few moments in the day when everyone can finally sit together. You pause briefly outside a doorway where a family is already gathered inside. A small oil lamp flickers on the table, casting soft light across the room. Shadows dance along the walls as someone tears bread into pieces. A man laughs, a child asks a question, someone passes a bowl across the table. Moments like this rarely appear in grand history books, but they were the quiet foundation of Roman life. Not emperors, not battles, just families sharing food under the soft glow of a lamp. You continue walking as the last light disappears from the sky. Now the city truly begins its nighttime transformation. Across the rooftops, more lamps appear, small flames blink alive inside windows like scattered stars. Taverns along the street hang lanterns above their doors, inviting customers inside. The air grows cooler, and the sound of music drifts faintly from somewhere farther down the road. Curiosity pulls you forward. A small crowd has gathered near the corner ahead. As you approach, you see the source of the music. A street performer stands beside a wooden stool, plucking strings from a small instrument that looks like a lyre. The melody is gentle and repetitive, perfect for the calm mood of evening. Beside him, another man tells a story. His voice rises and falls dramatically as the listeners react with quiet laughter and occasional applause. Street entertainment like this is common in Rome. Not everyone can afford to attend formal theatres or organise performances, but storytellers, musicians and travelling performers often bring entertainment directly into the streets. A few coins clink into a small bowl placed beside the stool. The performer nods gratefully without stopping the song. Behind the crowd, a tavern door swings open and a burst of louder sound spills into the street. Laughter, clattering cups, and someone shouting enthusiastically. That will be your next stop. Because while some Romans are settling into quiet family dinners, others are just beginning the liveliest part of their evening, and inside the taverns of Rome, the night is only getting started. The deeper you move into the evening streets of Rome, the more the city begins to glow. Not brightly, not like the modern cities you might be used to, but softly, gently, as if hundreds of tiny stars have quietly settled inside the buildings. Oil lamps are appearing everywhere now. You notice them first in windows. Small clay lamps resting on wooden shelves or stone ledges. Their flames flicker calmly, protected by shallow rims designed to prevent the oil from spilling. These lamps are simple objects, yet they are essential to Roman life. Most are made from clay. Some are decorated with small patterns or images, animals, gods, or scenes from mythology. Wealthier homes sometimes use bronze lamps, polished until they shine warmly in the firelight, but regardless of material, they all work the same way. Inside each lamp is olive oil. A thin wick made of plant fiber dips into the oil, drawing fuel upward toward the flame. Once lit, the wick burns slowly, creating a steady light that can last for hours. You pause outside a small doorway where a woman is carefully lighting her evening lamp. She leans close, shielding the flame with one hand while touching the wick with a small burning stick. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the wick catches. A tiny flame appears. She adjusts the lamp slightly, making sure it burns evenly before placing it on a wooden table just inside the doorway. Instantly, the small room behind her changes. Before the lamp, the interior was shadowy and difficult to see. Now the light spreads gently across the walls, revealing shelves, bowls, and a narrow bed pushed against the far side of the room. It's amazing how much difference one small flame can make. You continue walking, and soon the entire street begins to glow in this soft golden light. Rows of lamps flicker inside windows. Taverns hang lanterns above their entrances. Street vendors light torches beside their carts so customers can still see what they are buying. Rome at night is not dark, but it is dim. The shadows are deep. The light is warm and uneven, and the whole city feels almost dreamlike. Of course, lighting a lamp is not only about comfort, it is also about safety. Without lamps, homes would quickly become completely dark once the sun disappears. Roman buildings often have few windows, especially in crowded apartment blocks, so interior rooms rely heavily on artificial light. But lamps also carry a certain amount of risk. Open flames inside wooden structures are never entirely safe. In fact, fires were one of the greatest dangers in ancient Rome. Apartment buildings, the tall insulae where most ordinary citizens lived, were often packed tightly together. Many upper floors were made partly from wood, and cooking fires or lamps could easily ignite nearby materials. Because of this, Rome eventually created organized fire brigades known as the vigiles. These night watchmen patrolled the city after dark, carrying buckets, axes, and simple pumps designed to fight fires. They also acted as a kind of police force, watching for trouble in the streets. Scholars still argue whether the vigiles were more effective as firefighters or as night patrol guards, but their presence shows how seriously Romans understood the dangers of nighttime fires. You notice one such patrol now. 3 men walk slowly along the street, carrying lanterns. Their uniforms are simple but recognizable. Thick belts, short cloaks, and helmets, designed more for protection than decoration. One of them pauses briefly to examine a lamp hanging too close to a wooden awning outside a shop. He shakes his head disapprovingly and adjusts it slightly farther away from the wood. Small precautions like this could prevent disasters, and disasters did happen. Ancient historians wrote about massive fires sweeping through entire neighborhoods, destroying homes and forcing families to rebuild again and again. But tonight, the lamps behave themselves. Their flames flicker quietly, dancing in the calm evening air. You pass another apartment building where several residents sit together outside the entrance. Instead of going indoors immediately, they seem happy to remain outside while the temperature cools. One man sits on a low stool polishing a small metal tool. Another leans against the wall sipping watered wine from a clay cup. Nearby, two women talk softly while repairing a torn piece of clothing. The lamp beside them casts long shadows across the street. Moments like this are common in Roman neighborhoods. Life inside crowded apartments can be uncomfortable, especially during warm seasons. Upper floors trap heat, and narrow rooms leave little space to relax. So people often spend part of the evening outside, enjoying the cooler air before heading upstairs to sleep. You glance upward. Several windows above glow faintly with lamplight. From one of them you hear music. Someone practicing a flute or reed pipe. The melody drifts downward into the street, soft and slightly uneven, like someone still learning the instrument. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. Laughter echoes from a tavern around the corner, and from farther away you hear something else. Low, rhythmic rumble to wheels. Another cart moving through the city streets. Remember those delivery restrictions during the daytime? Now that evening has arrived, more carts are allowed inside the city. Merchants use this quieter time to move goods without fighting through massive daytime crowds. Unfortunately for anyone trying to sleep early, those wheels can be very loud. The stone roads amplify every bump and rattle. Juvenal, the Roman satirist, once joked that the constant noise of wagons made it nearly impossible to rest inside the city. According to him, anyone hoping for quiet sleep in Rome might need to move far outside the walls. But for now, the noise blends into the living rhythm of the city. The lamps flicker, the carts roll, people talk and laugh beneath the warm glow of firelight. And somewhere ahead, the taverns are filling with customers ready for food, wine, and conversation. You follow the sound of music and laughter down the street because while many Roman homes are settling into peaceful dinners, others are stepping into the lively world of evening taverns, and that world is far less quiet. The tavern doors are open. Warm light spills out onto the street, along with the smell of roasted meat, spiced wine, and something fried in olive oil that instantly makes you realize how hungry you are. Inside, the atmosphere is lively but not chaotic. Romans are talking, laughing, leaning over wooden tables and sipping from clay cups. The tavern keeper moves quickly between customers, refilling drinks and carrying bowls of food from a small kitchen near the back. Taverns were common across Rome. In Latin, they were often called tabernae, small establishments where people could buy food, wine, and sometimes a place to sit and relax after work. For many ordinary Romans, taverns served an important purpose because most people living in insulae apartments had very small kitchens. Some had no kitchen at all. Cooking fires. Inside, crowded buildings were dangerous and space was limited. So instead of preparing every meal at home, many citizens bought ready-made food from taverns or street vendors. You step closer to the doorway and watch the scene inside. A group of laborers sits around a rough wooden table near the entrance. Their hands are dusty, their tunics worn from a long day of work. One of them lifts a cup of wine and takes a slow drink, clearly enjoying the moment of rest. Wine was the most common drink in the Roman world, but it was usually mixed with water. Drinking pure wine was often considered excessive or even barbaric by Roman standards. Instead, tavern keepers diluted wine with water before serving it, sometimes adding herbs or spices for flavor. The mixture made it easier to drink over long conversations without becoming too intoxicated too quickly. Although, judging by the loud laughter coming from the back of the tavern, some customers may have forgotten that rule tonight. A tavern worker carries a large bowl past you and places it on a nearby table. Inside the bowl are pieces of roasted fish covered with herbs. Beside it sits a smaller dish filled with olives. Bread arrives a moment later. Simple food, but satisfying. You notice that not everyone inside the tavern looks the same. Some customers wear rough working clothes, others appear slightly wealthier, their tunics cleaner, their belts decorated with small metal buckles. Taverns were one of the few places where different social groups could mix more freely. The Roman social hierarchy was very real. Senators, equestrians, merchants, workers, slaves. But in casual spaces like taverns, those divisions sometimes softened. A merchant might sit near a craftsman, a traveller might share a table with a soldier, and occasionally strangers would strike up. Conversations that lasted long into the evening. You watch as two men nearby begin arguing about something, not angrily, more like a debate. One insists that a certain chariot racing team will win the next big competition at the Circus Maximus. Other laughs loudly and insists that the rival team is far stronger. Sports fandom, it turns out, is not a modern invention. Romans were famously passionate about chariot racing. 4 main teams competed in the Circus Maximus: the Blues, the Greens, the Reds, and the Whites. Fans supported their teams with incredible loyalty, sometimes even forming large organized groups around their favorite racers. Scholars still argue whether these teams represented political factions or simply sports rivalries. But there is no doubt that Romans cared deeply about the results. The argument grows louder as other customers begin offering their own opinions. Soon the entire table is laughing. Nearby, a musician sits on a stool playing a small lyre. The melody is slow and steady, not meant to dominate the room, but simply to add atmosphere. Music often accompanied tavern life. Sometimes it was professional performers. Sometimes it was simply someone in the crowd who knew how to play. Either way, it helped turn an ordinary evening meal into a shared social experience. You step farther inside the tavern. The walls are decorated with painted designs, simple patterns and small scenes of daily life. Some show people drinking wine, others show animals, boats, or mythological figures. Roman taverns were not always luxurious, but many tried to create a welcoming environment for regular customers. Behind the counter, the tavern keeper pours another cup of wine from a large clay jar. These jars, called amphorae, were commonly used to store wine and other liquids. They were sealed with cork or clay stoppers and stacked carefully in storage areas. Wine itself came from many regions across the Roman world. Some vineyards were located in Italy, others came from Spain, Greece, or the Eastern Mediterranean. Romany. Trade networks were vast, allowing goods to travel thousands of miles across land and sea. As you watch the tavern keeper serve another customer, a small commotion begins near the doorway. A traveller has arrived. His cloak is dusty from the road, and he carries a leather bag slung over his shoulder. After a brief conversation with the tavern keeper, he finds an empty seat near the wall. Travellers often brought news from distant places, stories about other cities, rumours about political events, occasionally even strange tales about lands far beyond the borders of the Roman Empire. Within minutes, several curious customers begin asking him questions. Where have you come from? How long was the journey? Did you see any trouble on the road? The traveller answers patiently while sipping his drink. In a world without newspapers or instant communication, travellers were living sources of information, and taverns were perfect places for those stories to spread. You step back outside for a moment. The night air feels cooler now. More lamps glow along the street, and the number of people walking outside has slowly begun to decrease. Many families are finishing their dinners, others are preparing to sleep. But inside taverns like this one, the evening conversation is still going strong. Wine cups clink together. Stories continue. Laughter spills into the street. And for many Romans, this simple gathering of food, drink, and conversation is one of the most enjoyable parts of the entire day. But not everyone spends the evening in taverns. Some Romans prefer a very different kind of nighttime gathering, a gathering that is quieter, more elegant, and far more extravagant, because in another part of the city tonight, wealthy Romans are preparing something much more elaborate than a simple tavern meal. they are preparing a dinner party, and Roman dinner parties can last for hours. Not far from the lively taverns, another kind of evening is quietly unfolding. You leave the noisy street behind and follow a wider road that leads toward a more elegant neighborhood of Rome. The buildings here feel different almost immediately. The streets are a little cleaner, the doorways are larger, and instead of crowded apartment blocks rising above you, there are wide homes hidden behind tall walls. These are the domus, the private houses of wealthier Roman families. From the outside, they often look plain. A tall wall, a wooden door, maybe a small window or two. But the real beauty of these homes lies inside. You pause near one doorway that stands slightly open. Warm light spills out into the street, along with the quiet sounds of preparation. Tonight, a dinner party is about to begin. For wealthy Romans, the evening meal was not simply about eating. It was an event. Servants moved quickly inside the house, carrying trays, lighting additional lamps, and arranging furniture in the dining room. Their footsteps echo softly across the polished floor. Inside the entrance hall, known as the atrium, a small pool of water reflects the lamplight from above. The roof here is partially open, allowing rainwater to fall into the basin below during storms. But tonight, the sky above is clear, and a faint evening breeze drifts through the space. The house smells wonderful. Roasted meat, honey, herbs, wine. A cook, somewhere deeper in the house, is clearly very busy. You move slightly closer and peek through the doorway as preparations continue. Several servants carry low couches into a room that opens off the atrium. This is the triclinium, the dining room where Roman banquets take place. Unlike modern dinners where people sit upright in chairs, wealthy Romans preferred to recline while eating. 3 couches are arranged around a central table. Guests will lie comfortably on these couches, propped up on one elbow while servants bring food, course after course. The arrangement allows everyone to face each other while dining. It also makes long conversations much easier, and Roman dinner parties were famous for their conversations, politics, philosophy, gossip, poetry. Everything might be discussed across the table as the evening slowly unfolds. Scholars still debate how formal these gatherings truly were. Some ancient writers describe elegant discussions about philosophy and art. Others describe wild parties, filled with excessive drinking and dramatic arguments. The truth was probably somewhere in between. You notice a servant carefully polishing a silver cup before placing it beside one of the couches. Nearby, another servant arranges small plates of appetizers. These early dishes are called gustatio. They might include olives, eggs, small fish, vegetables with sauces, or bread dipped in flavored oils. Roman meals often followed several stages. First came the appetizers, then the main dishes, known as prima mensa, which might include roasted meats, poultry, seafood, vegetables, and grains. Finally came the desserts. Secunda mensa, usually fruits, nuts, sweet pastries, or honey-covered treats. The number of courses depended on the wealth of the host. Some extravagant banquets could include 10 or more dishes. Others remained simpler, but still elegant. As the servants finish arranging the dining room, the first guests begin arriving. You hear footsteps outside the door. A knock. The wooden door opens, and a well-dressed man steps inside. His tunic is neatly folded, and a light cloak rests over his shoulders. A servant takes the cloak and bows politely. Guests often arrived slightly before sunset or shortly after. Dinner parties in Rome usually began as daylight faded and continued well into the night. Soon more guests appear. Another man enters, greeting the host with a warm embrace. A woman arrives wearing jewelry that glimmers in the lamplight. Laughter begins filling the atrium as the guests gather. Roman social life often revolved around these private gatherings. Public entertainment existed: theatres, races, festivals. But dinner parties allowed the wealthy to build friendships, discuss politics, and strengthen social connections. You step quietly inside the doorway, staying close to the wall as the host welcomes his guests. He raises his arms slightly and smiles. The evening has begun. Servants bring small cups of wine for everyone waiting in the atrium. Roman wine, as usual, is mixed with water. Sometimes herbs or honey are added to improve the flavor. One guest takes a sip and nods approvingly. Another jokes about how strong the wine was at the last party he attended. Everyone laughs. You notice something interesting. While the guests chat, servants move almost invisibly around them. They refill cups, adjust lamps, carry trays of food into the dining room. In wealthy Roman homes, enslaved servants performed nearly every task required to run the household. Cooking, cleaning, serving meals, maintaining the house. All of it depended heavily on their labor. Ancient writers rarely focused on these workers, but their presence was essential to the smooth operation of elite Roman life. Without them, banquets like this would have been impossible. A bell rings softly, the signal that dinner is ready. The host gestures toward the dining room. Guests slowly move into the triclinium, arranging themselves on the couches according to social rank. Important guests often receive the most comfortable positions. Servants begin bringing the first course of food. The smell of roasted meat grows stronger. Wine flows more freely. Conversation grows louder. The long Roman evening feast has officially begun. And if you stay nearby long enough, you might discover that these banquets can become far more entertaining than anyone expected. Inside the dining room, the atmosphere slowly settles into the rhythm of a Roman banquet. You step quietly along the edge of the triclinium, staying near the shadows while the guests take their places. The soft glow of oil lamps reflects off polished plates and bronze cups, casting warm patterns of light across the walls. 3 couches surround a low central table. Each couch holds several guests who recline comfortably on their sides, leaning on one elbow while leaving the other hand free for eating. Cushions support their backs, making it easier to remain in this position for hours, and yes, hours. Roman dinner parties were not quick meals. They were long, social experiences meant to stretch deep into the evening. Servants move carefully between the couches, carrying the first dishes of the meal, the gustatio or appetizers. One tray holds small eggs sprinkled with herbs. Another carries olives soaked in oil and spices. A third plate displays slices of bread with soft cheese and honey. Guests reach forward casually, picking up small portions while continuing their conversations. Wine is poured again, always mixed with water. The mixture sits in a large bowl called a crater, from which servants fill individual cups. Drinking unmixed wine was sometimes associated with wild behavior or foreign customs, so Roman hosts usually made sure it was diluted properly, although the balance between wine and water could quietly change as the evening progressed. The more relaxed the party became, the stronger the mixture sometimes grew. One guest raises his cup slightly and tells a short joke. The others laugh. Another begins, describing a recent chariot race at the Circus Maximus, using his hands dramatically to recreate the moment a chariot nearly overturned around a sharp corner. You notice how much storytelling fills the room. Roman banquets were not silent affairs. Conversation was one of the main forms of entertainment. Philosophical debates sometimes appeared at more intellectual gatherings. Wealthy Romans admired Greek philosophy, and some hosts invited guests, specifically known for their clever ideas or witty arguments. But most dinners included a mixture of topics: politics, travel, poetry, local gossip, and occasionally a little friendly. Bragging about personal achievements, a servant appears carrying a beautifully decorated platter. The appetizers are ending. Now the main meal begins. The platter is placed carefully on the table. Inside rests a roasted bird, golden brown covered with herbs and dripping slightly with juices. The smell immediately captures everyone's attention. Another dish arrives moments later. This one contains roasted vegetables seasoned with garlic and oil. Then comes a bowl of lentils, then slices of fish. Roman cuisine was surprisingly varied. While many ordinary citizens ate simple meals, wealthy households had access to a wide range of ingredients brought from across the empire. Olive oil from Spain, wine from Greece, grains from Egypt, spices from the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome's vast trade networks allowed elite families to enjoy foods from distant regions. You watch as one guest tastes a piece of the roasted bird and nods approvingly toward the host. The host smiles modestly, but clearly enjoys the compliment. Hosting a successful dinner party was a matter of reputation. Generous meals suggested wealth, hospitality, and social influence. But sometimes Roman banquets also included unusual dishes meant to surprise guests. Ancient writers described extravagant foods like peacock, flamingo, or dormice served with honey and herbs. Yes, dormice. Small, rodents raised specifically for cooking. Odd by modern standards, but considered a delicacy in certain Roman circles. Scholars still debate how common these exotic foods truly were. Some historians believe they were rare luxuries mentioned mainly to impress readers. Others believe wealthy Romans genuinely enjoyed experimenting with unusual flavors. Either way, Roman cookbooks such as those attributed to Apicius show that the ancient kitchen could be surprisingly creative. As the guests continue eating, the conversation grows more relaxed. Wine cups are refilled again. Someone begins reciting a short poem. Another guest responds by offering a playful critique of the poem's rhythm. A small group laughs loudly at a private joke. Meanwhile, the servants continue working almost silently. They clear empty plates, bring fresh dishes, refill lamps when the flames begin to shrink. Without this quiet choreography, the banquet would quickly fall into chaos. You notice another form of entertainment beginning at the far side of the room. A young musician enters carrying a small string instrument. He sits on a low stool and begins playing a gentle melody. The music is soft enough that conversation continues easily over it. Sometimes banquets also included dancers, acrobats, or professional performers. Wealthy hosts occasionally hired entertainers to impress their guests and create memorable evenings. Tonight's gathering is more relaxed. Music, conversation, and good food seem to be enough. The evening continues flowing smoothly. Outside, the streets of Rome are becoming quieter as more families finish dinner and settle inside their homes. But inside this dining room, the night still feels young. Dessert has not even arrived yet, and Roman desserts can be surprisingly sweet. Soon bowls of figs, dates, and honey-covered pastries will appear. More wine will follow. Stories will grow longer. Laughter will grow louder. And the banquet will slowly drift toward its most relaxed and entertaining stage. But while wealthy, Romans enjoy these luxurious dinners. Most of the city is experiencing a much simpler evening. Families gathering at small tables, children finishing their meals, neighbors chatting in dimly lit streets. Because across Rome tonight, thousands of ordinary households are sharing quiet dinners under the soft glow of oil lamps, and those small moments are just as important to the story of Roman evenings. While the elegant banquet continues behind the walls of wealthy houses, the rest of Rome is settling into a much simpler rhythm. You step away from the quiet domus neighborhood and return toward the busier streets where ordinary citizens live. The air here smells different again, less like roasted delicacies and more like everyday food being prepared quickly and cheaply. Street food. For many Romans, dinner did not happen in large dining rooms or on reclining couches. Instead, it happened standing beside a vendor's stall or sitting on a wooden bench outside a small shop. You turn a corner and immediately see one of these places. A small storefront with a wide opening facing the street. Inside are several large clay containers built directly into a stone counter. Steam rises gently from them, and the warm smell of cooked grains drifts into the air. This kind of establishment is called a thermopolium. The name might sound complicated, but the idea is very simple. It's a Roman fast food stand. Inside the clay containers are hot foods that customers can quickly buy and eat. Lentils, beans, stews, vegetables, and sometimes small pieces of meat or fish. For people living in crowded apartment buildings without proper kitchens, these places were extremely convenient. You watch as a worker ladles a portion of steaming lentil stew into a clay bowl and hands it to a waiting customer. The customer pays a few coins and moves aside to make room for the next person in line. Nearby, another vendor sells bread with small pieces of roasted pork. A third offers bowls of chickpeas seasoned with herbs. The smells blend together in the warm evening air. It might not be the luxury of a Roman banquet, but for many workers finishing a long day, it is exactly what they need. Hot food, a place to sit, and maybe a cup of watered wine to relax the body. You notice a group of construction workers gathered near a low wooden table outside one of the stalls. Their hands are rough and their clothes dusty, but their mood is cheerful. One of them tears a loaf of bread in half and passes part of it to his friend. Another spoons stew directly from a bowl, blowing gently on each bite to cool it down. They talk between mouthfuls, probably about work, or tomorrow's tasks, or maybe about the chariot races that everyone in Rome seems to love discussing. A man sitting nearby suddenly raises his voice excitedly while describing a race he watched earlier. In the week, his arms swing wildly as he explains how one chariot nearly crashed into the barrier. Several listeners lean forward, smiling as they imagine the scene. Sports debates clearly do not belong only inside taverns. You continue walking along the row of food stalls. Each one has its own small specialty. Some sell fish cooked with herbs. Others focus on vegetables or grains. One stall even offers sweet pastries dipped in honey. Roman desserts were often simple but satisfying: fruits, nuts, and honey-based treats. You watch a young boy carefully carry a small pastry wrapped in cloth as he heads home through the crowd. His face shows the careful concentration of someone trying very hard not to drop something delicious, street food-like. This was a normal part of Roman life. Archaeologists have discovered many thermopolia in the ruins of Pompeii and other Roman cities. Some still contain the original counters and storage jars, giving us a clear picture of how these ancient food stands operated. Scholars still debate exactly how common these stalls were, but evidence suggests they were extremely popular in busy urban areas. And looking at the crowd around you, that theory seems very believable. As you move farther down the street, the mood changes slightly. The food stalls give way to a cluster of small taverns and wine shops. Their doors remain open, lanterns hanging outside to attract passing customers. Inside one, several people sit around a table playing a game with small dice. Dice games were one of the most common forms of Roman gambling. Players rolled small carved cubes made from bone or stone, hoping for lucky numbers. Technically, gambling was restricted under Roman law, but like many laws throughout history, it was often ignored, especially during evenings in taverns. A man throws the dice across the table. They bounce once, twice, and settle. Cheers erupt. Someone has clearly won the round. Across the room, another group sings loudly along with a musician strumming a lyre. Their voices are not perfectly in tune, but they are enthusiastic. Very enthusiastic. You step back outside and continue your evening walk. The streets are beginning to thin slightly. Now, more families are heading home. More windows glow with lamplight above the street. A dog wanders past, sniffing curiously at the ground before disappearing into an alley. The sounds of Rome are changing again. Earlier, the city was filled with the noise of markets and closing shops. Now the sounds are softer. Conversations drifting from open windows, occasional laughter, the distant clatter of a cart moving through another street, and somewhere far away, the faint sound of music continuing late into the evening. But there is one place where the evening activity is still very strong. A place where Romans go not just to eat, but to relax completely. You notice a steady stream of people walking toward a large building at the end of the road. Steam rises faintly above its roof. Lanterns glow beside the entrance, and from inside comes the unmistakable sound of splashing, water, and lively conversation. The public baths are still open, and for many Romans the evening bath is the most relaxing moment of the entire day. You follow the crowd moving toward the large building at the end of the street. Even from a distance, the place feels alive. Lanterns glow beside the wide entrance, and warm steam drifts lazily into the evening air. Voices echo from inside, not loud arguments or rowdy singing like the taverns, but a steady murmur of conversation mixed with the sound of splashing water. The public baths, for many Romans, this is the true reward at the end of a long day. You step through the entrance and immediately feel the difference. The air inside is warmer. The stone floors hold the heat from earlier in the day, and the faint smell of oils and herbs lingers in the air. Lamps line the walls, casting golden light across tall ceilings supported by thick columns. The bathhouse is much larger than it looked from outside. Roman bath complexes were often enormous buildings filled with different rooms designed for various stages of bathing and relaxation. Some bathhouses were so large they included gardens, exercise yards, and even libraries. This one is more modest but still impressive. You enter the first room, the apoditerium, the changing room. Benches line the walls and visitors are removing their clothes before heading deeper into the baths. Many place their belongings in small storage niches carved into the walls. A few attendants move around the room, watching over the clothing. In wealthier bathhouses, attendants sometimes guarded these items to prevent theft, although even then theft occasionally happened. Roman poets joked about bathhouse thieves sneaking away with sandals or tunics while their owners relaxed in the pools. You continue into the next chamber, the tepidarium. This room is comfortably warm, not hot enough to make you sweat immediately, but warm enough to relax the body after a day of work. The air feels slightly humid, and the stone benches along the walls invite visitors to sit and talk. Several men are already gathered here. One leans back with his eyes closed, clearly enjoying the warmth. Another talks animatedly with two friends, while rubbing oil across his arms. Bathing in Rome often involved oil rather than soap. Visitors would coat their skin with olive oil and then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. This removed dirt, sweat, and oil all at once. It might sound unusual today, but it was a very common cleaning method in the ancient world. A young man nearby finishes scraping his arm and laughs as his friend makes a joke about the day's work. You notice how social the bathhouse feels. People don't simply arrive, wash quickly, and leave. They linger, they talk, they relax. In many ways, the baths function almost like a community center. You move forward into the caldarium, the hot room. The heat hits you immediately. Steam curls upward from a large pool of hot water, and the air feels thick and humid. Visitors sit along the edge of the pool, dipping into the water or simply enjoying the warmth. The heating system behind this room is actually quite impressive. Roman engineers designed something called a hypercaust, an underfloor heating system, where hot air from a furnace traveled beneath the floors and inside hollow walls. This allowed rooms like the caldarium to remain consistently warm. It was an early version of central heating, and it worked remarkably well. You watch as a man lowers himself slowly into the hot pool. He sighs deeply, clearly relieved to finally relax after the day's labor. Nearby, two merchants continue discussing business even while bathing. Deals and negotiations sometimes happened here. The bathhouse was not only a place to clean the body, it was also a place to exchange news and ideas. Scholars still debate how much serious business truly occurred in bathhouses, but Roman writers frequently describe them as centers of social interaction. You notice another group of visitors preparing to move to the final stage of their bath. They walk toward a room where the air feels noticeably cooler, the frigidarium. Inside this chamber sits a pool of cold water. After spending time in warm and hot rooms, bathers plunge into this cold pool to refresh the body and close the pores. One man hesitates at the edge of the pool, clearly bracing himself. His friend grins mischievously and suddenly splashes water toward him. With a shout of surprise, he jumps, and the cold shock fills the room with laughter. Bathhouses were not always calm or silent. In fact, they could be quite lively. Ancient writer Seneca once complained about the noise from bathhouses, describing the sounds of splashing, shouting, exercise, and even people singing loudly while bathing. So if you imagined Roman baths as peaceful spa retreats, the reality was probably much louder. You walk along the edge of the pool and look back across the bath complex. People move from room to room, some bathing, some resting, some simply sitting together and talking. For many citizens, this evening routine was one of the most pleasant parts of daily life. Clean skin, relaxed muscles, friendly conversation. Outside the bathhouse, night has fully arrived. The streets of Rome glow with lamplight. Taverns continue their conversations. Families settle inside their homes, and somewhere above the rooftops, the first bright stars shine clearly in the dark sky. You step back toward the entrance of the bathhouse where visitors are slowly gathering their clothes before heading home. Their bodies are clean, their muscles relaxed, their mood lighter than when they arrived, but the evening is not finished yet, because even after bathing, Romans still have time for conversation, strolling through the streets or visiting friends before sleep finally arrives. And in the bathhouse halls, the conversations of the night are only just beginning. You remain inside the bathhouse a little longer. Not because you need another bath, but because the conversations happening around you are too interesting to leave just yet. This is something many Romans understood well. The baths were not only about water and cleaning, they were about people. You step into a quieter corner of the tepidarium, where several visitors sit comfortably along a heated stone bench. The warmth seeps gently through the floor beneath your feet, making the entire room feel calm and relaxing. A group of older men sits together near one wall. Their voices are calm but steady, the tone of people deeply engaged in conversation. One of them gestures slowly with his hand while explaining something about a recent political decision in the city. Another nods thoughtfully while rubbing olive oil across his arm. Politics again. In Rome, political discussion never seemed to take a break, not even during bathing. Public life was central to Roman identity. Citizens debated laws, leaders, and public events constantly. Even people without official power often had strong opinions about what was happening in the government. And the bathhouse was a perfect place for these discussions. You move slightly closer, pretending to study the decorative patterns on the wall, while quietly listening. The men are discussing grain shipments arriving from Egypt. Egypt was one of the most important provinces of the Roman Empire because it supplied enormous amounts of grain to feed the population of Rome. Without this steady supply, the massive city might have struggled to support its people. One man argues that recent shipments have been delayed by storms. Another insists the problem comes from corruption among officials managing the ports. Their voices rise slightly as the debate continues. Scholars today still argue about how efficiently Rome's grain supply system worked, but ancient sources suggest it was an incredibly complex operation involving ships, warehouses, and government oversight. Listening to these men talk, you realize that even ordinary citizens were aware of how important this system was. Food supply meant survival, and survival was everyone's concern. Across the room, a different kind of conversation is happening. A group of younger men sits together, laughing loudly. One of them has just returned from military service. You know this because he is describing a long journey across rough terrain somewhere far from Rome. His hands move dramatically as he explains how his unit marched for days through mud and rain. His friends listen with wide eyes. Military stories were always popular. Rome's empire depended heavily on its armies, and soldiers returning home often brought tales of distant lands, strange cultures, and difficult battles. Sometimes these stories were exaggerated just a little, but no one seems to mind. The excitement of the story matters more than perfect accuracy. You notice another small group near the entrance of the room. These men are not talking about politics or military adventures. Instead, they appear to be discussing poetry. One man recites a short verse aloud while the others listen carefully. Romany. Culture admired literature deeply, especially works inspired by Greek traditions. Educated Romans often enjoyed quoting poetry during social gatherings. Sometimes these recitations were serious, sometimes they were playful. Tonight, the group responds with good-natured teasing after the poem ends. One man jokes that the rhythm sounded better in the poet's head than in his voice. Everyone laughs. Moments like this remind you that Roman evenings were rarely quiet or isolated. Life happened in shared spaces, bathhouses, taverns, streets. Neighbors constantly crossed paths, exchanged news, and filled the city with conversation. You walk toward another part of the bath complex where visitors are using a small exercise area. Several men practice light wrestling on a sand-covered floor. Nearby, another man lifts a heavy stone weight, clearly trying to impress the small audience watching him. Exercise was often part of the bathhouse routine. Many bath complexes included areas for physical activity before bathing. Wrestling, stretching, and weight training helped loosen muscles after long days of labor or travel. A boy tries to lift the same stone weight. It barely moves. The spectators chuckle kindly. He grins sheepishly and pretends he wasn't really trying. The relaxed atmosphere of the baths encourages this kind of playful interaction. No one here is rushing. No one is checking the time. Evening in Rome moves slowly. Eventually, you notice some visitors beginning to leave. They collect their clothing in the apoditerium, adjusting belts and cloaks before stepping back into the night air. The bathhouse remains busy, but the earlier rush is starting to fade. You decide it might be time to continue your walk as well. Stepping outside, you immediately feel the cooler night air against your skin. The sky above Rome is now fully dark. Stars shine clearly between the rooftops. Oil lamps glow from windows across the city, creating a soft golden pattern against the darkness. The streets are quieter now. Not empty. Rome never becomes completely silent, but calmer than before. Most families have finished dinner. Many citizens have completed their evening baths. Now the city slowly begins preparing for the final stage of the night. Some people head home, others stop for one last drink, and a few wander the streets, simply enjoying the cool air before sleep. You join them, continuing your slow walk through the lamplit roads of ancient Rome, because even as the city begins to wind down, there are still many small moments left in the Roman evening. Moments of conversation, moments of quiet reflection, and moments when the great city pauses just briefly before finally drifting toward sleep. You continue walking through the quieter streets, leaving the warm steam of the bathhouse behind you. The night air now feels pleasantly cool against your skin. Rome has changed again. Earlier, the streets were crowded with workers finishing their day, vendors selling food, and friends gathering outside taverns. Now the movement is slower, crowds are thinner, but the city is still awake. In fact, another kind of evening activity is just beginning. You hear it before you see it. Music, a soft rhythm carried through the narrow streets by the night air. You follow the sound around a corner and discover a small group of people gathered in an open space between buildings. Lamps hang from hooks on the walls, their flames swaying slightly in the breeze. At the center of the crowd stands a performer. He holds a lyre, its curved wooden arms catching the glow of the lamps. His fingers move gently across the strings, producing a calm, flowing melody. Beside him stands another man, a storyteller. His voice rises and falls dramatically as he describes the adventures of a famous hero. You recognize the name Hercules. Stories about Hercules were extremely popular throughout the Roman world. The powerful hero, famous for completing 12 difficult labors, appeared in countless tales, paintings, and sculptures. Tonight, the storyteller describes one of those labors, the battle with the Nemean lion. The crowd listens closely. Children sit near the front, their eyes wide with excitement. Adults stand behind them, smiling, as the storyteller imitates the roaring of the lion. Street performances like this were common evening entertainment. Not everyone in Rome could afford seats at the large theaters or attend formal shows, but performers often traveled through neighborhoods bringing music, stories, and small acts directly to the streets. Some were professional entertainers, others simply enjoyed performing for a crowd. Either way, the result was the same, a small moment of shared entertainment beneath the lamps of the city. You lean against a nearby wall and watch for a while. The storyteller reaches the dramatic moment of the tale. Hercules finally defeating the lion after a fierce struggle. The crowd cheers. One child jumps to his feet and pretends to swing an imaginary club. The performer bows slightly as a few coins drop into a small bowl placed at his feet. Even small donations could make these performances worthwhile. In a city as large as Rome, entertainers could move from neighborhood to neighborhood, gathering small crowds each evening. You continue your walk as the performance comes to an end. The music fades behind you, replaced by another sound drifting through the night. Drums. This time the rhythm is faster. Turning another corner, you find a group of young performers practicing acrobatics in a wider street. One flips through the air while the others clap to keep the rhythm. Street acrobats were another popular form of entertainment. Traveling performers sometimes formed small troupes, combining music, juggling, dancing, and acrobatics to create lively shows. Tonight's audience is small but enthusiastic. A baker who has just closed his shop watches from the doorway. Two children sit cross-legged on the ground, clapping each time an acrobat lands successfully. You notice how the lamps around the street cast long shadows that stretch across the walls. The flickering light gives the performance an almost magical atmosphere. For a moment, the busy city of Rome feels like a small village gathered around a campfire. But entertainment in Rome was not limited to music and storytelling. Sometimes simple games provided just as much excitement. Further down the road, several men gather around a small board placed on a crate. They are playing a strategy game called Trunculi. The game involves moving small pieces across a grid, attempting to trap an opponent's pieces between your own. It requires patience, clever planning, and a bit of luck. Two players lean forward intensely, studying the board. Spectators whisper suggestions. One move is made, another. Then suddenly, someone gasps, "The trap has worked." The losing player shakes his head and laughs while the spectators congratulate the winner. Games like this were common in Roman evenings. Board games, dice games, and simple competitions helped pass the time while friends gathered together. Without modern screens or digital distractions, people entertained themselves through conversation and shared activities. You begin walking again. The night continues deepening. Above you, the stars grow brighter now that the last glow of sunset has completely faded. Some windows are already dark, their residents preparing for sleep. Others still glow softly with lamplight. Inside those homes, families might be finishing their conversations or preparing bedding for the night. Rome never becomes perfectly silent, but the city is slowly drifting toward calm. Even the taverns that were lively earlier are beginning to quiet. The loudest voices fade into softer laughter. Music slows. Footsteps become less frequent. Soon, only the occasional traveller or night patrol will remain in the streets. But before Rome fully settles into sleep, there are still a few quieter moments left in the evening. Moments when families gather together inside their homes. Moments when neighbours speak softly outside their doors. Moments when the great city pauses and simply breathes beneath the night sky. You wander farther down the quiet street, where the lamps burn a little lower and the sounds of music and laughter have begun to fade into the distance. Now the city feels calmer. This is the hour when many Romans finally return fully to their homes. You pass beneath a wooden balcony where a faint glow shines from the window above. From inside comes the quiet murmur of voices, a family finishing their evening together. Inside homes across Rome, this part of the night belongs to families. For ordinary households, the evening after dinner often became the only time when everyone could sit together without work interrupting them. The father might have spent the entire day working at a shop or construction site. The mother may have been managing the home, preparing food, cleaning, or caring for children. Children themselves may have been running errands, learning trades, or helping with household tasks, but now the day's responsibilities are mostly finished. You stop beside the doorway of a small apartment building. The entrance leads to a narrow staircase climbing upward through the building. The walls are rough stone and the steps creak softly as someone walks down from an upper floor carrying a small oil lamp. Apartment buildings like this, the insula, housed the majority of Rome's population. Each floor contained several small rooms rented by families or individuals. The higher floors were usually cheaper but less comfortable. Climbing many flights of stairs every day was tiring, and the upper levels often became very hot during summer months. Still, these apartments allowed thousands of people to live within the busy heart of the city. You glance through one open doorway, near the bottom floor. Inside, a small family sits around a low wooden table. The meal appears nearly finished. A clay bowl rests in the center with a few pieces of bread remaining. A child leans forward eagerly as the mother pours a small portion of watered wine into a cup for the father. Children in Roman families usually drank diluted wine as well, though in much smaller amounts. Wine mixed with water was considered safer than plain water in some situations, since alcohol could help reduce certain impurities. The father takes a slow sip, clearly enjoying the quiet moment. Beside him, the children begin talking excitedly about something that happened earlier in the day, perhaps a game in the street, perhaps a story told at the bathhouse. You notice the mother smiling patiently while listening to them. Even in ancient Rome, family conversations probably sounded very familiar. Children telling long stories, parents nodding and laughing at the best parts. Across the room, a small oil lamp flickers on a wooden shelf. Its light casts soft shadows against the walls. The room is simple: a table, a few stools, two small beds pushed against the far wall, but it feels warm and peaceful. Moments like this rarely appear in grand, historical records, yet they were probably the most common scenes in Roman life. Thousands of families sharing simple evenings in small homes. Talking, laughing, preparing for sleep. You continue your walk down the street. Ahead, two neighbours sit outside, their doors on low stools. Instead of going indoors immediately, they seem happy to enjoy the cooler night air while chatting. One holds a small cup of wine. The other gestures slowly while telling a story. The conversation seems relaxed. Neighbors in Roman neighborhoods often knew each other well. Living in crowded buildings and narrow streets meant that people frequently crossed paths throughout the day. Friendships formed naturally through daily interaction. You notice a dog lying nearby, half asleep but occasionally lifting its head when someone passes. Dogs were common companions in Roman households. Some guarded homes, others simply kept families company. In Pompeii, archaeologists even discovered a famous mosaic near the entrance of one house that read Cave Canem, meaning beware of the dog. Apparently, even ancient homeowners liked to warn visitors about protective pets. A small group of children runs past you, their footsteps echoing briefly against the stone street. They are probably being called home by their parents after staying out slightly too long. Nighttime streets were not always considered safe for children to wander freely. Thieves occasionally moved through dark alleys, and without strong lighting, accidents were possible. Because of this, many families preferred to keep younger children indoors once the night grew deeper. The city grows quieter still. More windows darken as lamps are blown out. A breeze moves gently through the street, carrying faint smells of food, oil, and smoke above. The stars seem brighter now. Without modern electric lights, the Roman night sky could appear incredibly clear. Constellations stretch across the darkness. Ancient Romans recognized many of these same star patterns and often connected them with myths and legends. Scholars still debate how commonly ordinary citizens studied the stars, but there is no doubt that the night sky was far more visible than it is in most modern cities. You pause for a moment, looking upward. The sounds of the city have softened. Some conversations still drift through open windows. A distant cart rattles somewhere far away. But compared to the bustling afternoon markets, Rome now feels almost peaceful. Soon even these quiet conversations will fade. Families will settle into their beds. The night watch will begin its patrol, and the great city of Rome will finally begin drifting towards sleep. But the night is not completely over yet, because in temples across the city, a few Romans are still finishing their evening prayers beneath the flickering light of sacred lamps. You leave the quiet neighborhood behind and continue walking through the calm night streets of Rome. The lamps are still glowing in many windows, but the energy of the city has softened. Voices are quieter now, footsteps are slower. Yet in certain parts of the city, the evening still carries a sense of quiet purpose. Ahead of you, rising above the surrounding buildings, stands a temple. Its tall stone columns catch the faint glow of nearby lamps, casting long shadows across the steps. Even at night, temples remained important places in Roman life. Religion in Rome was woven into everyday routines. People offered prayers in the morning before work. They made offerings during festivals. And sometimes at the end of the day, they stopped by temples to give thanks or ask for protection during the night. You climb the wide stone steps slowly. The temple doors stand open. Inside, the air feels calm and still. Oil lamps burn near the altar, their flames steady in the quiet space. The light reveals statues of gods carved carefully from marble. One of them stands at the center, the deity honored by this temple. Roman religion included many gods: Jupiter, the king of the gods; Juno, protector of families; Mars, the god of war; Venus, associated with love and beauty; and dozens of others connected to nature, household life, and daily activities. The Roman world was deeply spiritual, but not always in the same way modern religions operate. Instead of one central belief system, Romans practiced a wide collection of rituals and traditions meant to maintain harmony between humans and the gods. You notice a man standing quietly near the altar. He places a small offering, a handful of incense, into a bronze bowl. A thin ribbon of smoke rises slowly toward the ceiling. He bows his head briefly. Perhaps he is asking for a safe journey tomorrow. Perhaps he is thanking the gods for a successful business deal. Or perhaps he is simply following a habit learned since childhood. Nearby, a woman lights a small lamp and places it beside the statue. Private prayers like this were common. Many Romans believed the gods could influence daily events, health, harvests, travel, and even the outcome of competitions. So offering a small prayer at the end of the day was a way of seeking balance and protection. You step quietly through the temple hall. The stone floor beneath your feet feels cool compared to the warm streets outside. Even though the temple is not crowded, you are not alone. A few other visitors move silently through the room. One man studies the statue carefully before whispering a short prayer. Another places a small coin beside the altar. These small acts of devotion might seem simple, but they carried deep meaning for many people. Roman religion was less about grand sermons and more about daily rituals. Scholars still debate how strongly individuals believed in these traditions versus simply following cultural customs, but archaeological evidence, including thousands of small offerings discovered in temples, suggests that many Romans took these rituals seriously. Outside the temple, the city continues its slow journey toward sleep. You step back onto the temple steps and pause for a moment. From this higher vantage point, you can see several streets stretching into the distance. Each one glows faintly with scattered lamps. Some windows are still lit, others are already dark. A few late travelers pass quietly below. One carries a small lantern to guide his way through the dim streets. Another walks beside a friend, their conversation soft and relaxed. The night air feels cooler now. A gentle breeze moves across the rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell rings softly. Not loudly, like an alarm, but gently enough to mark the passing of time. In the ancient world, nighttime was very different from modern life. Without bright electric lighting, the hours after sunset naturally encouraged people to slow down. Activities gradually ended. Shops closed. Homes grew quiet. The darkness reminded everyone that rest was approaching. You walk down the temple steps and return to the street. The stars above shine clearly now. Constellations stretch across the sky like ancient patterns waiting to be recognized. Romans knew many of these constellations and connected them with their myths: the hero Orion, the hunter, the Great Bear, stories written across the night sky. For people living in the crowded city below, these stars were constant companions. No matter how busy Rome became during the day, the same sky always returned each night. You continue walking through the peaceful streets. A few taverns remain open. Their lanterns glow softly as the final customers finish their drinks. But the loud energy of earlier hours has faded. Most Romans are now preparing for sleep. Families gather inside their homes. Children climb into beds. Oil lamps burn lower as their fuel slowly runs out. Soon, only the night watch will remain awake. And as the city grows quieter with every passing moment, another group of Romans begins their nightly duty, patrolling the dark streets to keep the sleeping city safe. You continue walking along the quiet street as the temple fades behind you. The city now feels noticeably calmer. Many windows have gone dark, their lamps extinguished as families prepare for sleep. The taverns that once echoed with laughter are quieter now, with only a few lingering customers finishing their final cups of wine. But Rome is not entirely asleep. In fact, another group of people is just beginning their work. Ahead, you hear the steady rhythm of footsteps. 3 men appear at the far end of the street, their lanterns swinging gently as they walk. The soft light reveals metal helmets, thick belts and short cloaks wrapped around their shoulders. The Vigiles. These men form Rome's nighttime watch. Created during the reign of Emperor Augustus, the vigiles served as a combination of firefighters and police patrols for the city. With Rome's crowded streets and flammable buildings, nighttime fires were a serious threat. So while most citizens rested, these watchmen remained awake. They moved slowly along the road, scanning the buildings and checking the lamps hanging outside, shops and homes. One of them pauses beside a doorway where a lantern burns too close to a wooden beam. He adjusts it slightly, ensuring the flame sits safely away from the structure. Small actions like this could prevent disaster. Ancient Rome had suffered many devastating fires. One of the most famous occurred during the reign of Emperor Nero, when a massive blaze destroyed large sections of the city. Though historians still debate the exact causes of that fire, events like it made Romans painfully aware of how quickly flames could spread. The vigiles existed to prevent such tragedies whenever possible. Each patrol usually carried simple equipment: buckets for water, axes to break through doors or walls if necessary, and small pumps designed to spray water during fires. The tools were basic by modern standards, but they were effective enough to fight smaller blazes. The watchmen continue their patrol down the street, their lanterns casting long shadows along the walls. You follow at a distance. They stop briefly near a corner where a narrow alley disappears between buildings. One man lifts his lantern and peers into the darkness. Another listens carefully. Dark alleys could hide trouble: thieves, drunken arguments, or small fires beginning unnoticed. After a moment, the patrol moves on. Rome's nighttime safety depended heavily on these quiet routines. Scholars still debate how many vigiles patrolled the city at once, but records suggest thousands served across different districts. The city itself was divided into several regions, each with its own watch stations where patrols could rest between rounds. You notice another patrol crossing an intersection ahead. The two groups exchange brief greetings before continuing in opposite directions. Their movements create a quiet network of protection across the sleeping city. Nearby, a small tavern is closing for the night. The owner steps outside and lowers the wooden shutters over the windows. He hangs one final lantern near the doorway before locking the door behind him. Inside, the last customers have already gone home. Across the street, a stray dog trots past, sniffing the ground before disappearing around the corner. Even the animals of the city seem to understand that the night is settling in. You walk slowly through the dim street. The sounds are different now. Instead of lively conversations and music, the city produces softer noises: the creak of wooden doors closing, the distant clatter of a wagon delivering goods under the cover of darkness, the occasional echo of footsteps from someone heading home late. Juvenal, the Roman writer, once complained that these nighttime wagons made sleeping in Rome nearly impossible. As if to prove his point, a cart suddenly rattles across a nearby road. The driver guides a pair of mules carefully through the narrow street, while stacked goods shift inside the wagon behind him. Delivery during nighttime hours was common because daytime traffic made moving large carts difficult. The wagon passes slowly, its wheels scraping against the stones before fading into the distance. Soon the street becomes quiet again. You look up toward the sky. Without electric lights, the stars above Rome shine brilliantly. The Milky Way stretches faintly across the darkness like a silver cloud. For Romans living in the city, this view was a normal part of every night. Some people studied the stars carefully. Astronomers and philosophers tried to understand the movements of planets and constellations. Others simply admired the beauty of the sky. You continue walking until the street opens into a small square. A fountain trickles quietly at the center. The water reflects the nearby lamps, creating gentle ripples of light across the stone basin. Two night watchmen pass through the square, their lanterns swinging slowly. They nod to each other but say nothing. Their duty continues across the city. Similar patrols move silently through. The darkness, checking lamps, watching for fires, listening for trouble. Thanks to them, the sleeping neighborhoods of Rome remained safe through the long night. But even now, a few Romans are still awake. Some finishing quiet conversations, some writing letters by lamplight, some simply enjoying the peaceful calm that arrives after the busy day. And as the hours move steadily forward, the great city continues its slow journey toward complete rest. The night deepens. You continue walking through Rome's quiet streets, and now the city feels very different from the lively place it was just a few hours ago. The lamps burn lower. The conversations have mostly faded. Even the taverns that stayed open late are now closing their doors. But while Rome may seem peaceful at this hour, the darkness also brings certain dangers. You turn into a narrow street where the buildings lean close together overhead. The space between them forms a long corridor of shadow, broken only by an occasional oil lamp hanging beside a doorway. In ancient Rome, streets like this could be risky after dark. Without strong lighting, it was easy for someone to hide in the darkness. The city had laws and patrols meant to discourage crime, but like any large urban centre, Rome still experienced theft and trouble in certain areas. Roman writers sometimes warned about wandering alone too late at night. Juvenal, the same satirical poet who complained about noisy wagons, also joked about the dangers of nighttime encounters in Rome. According to him, someone walking home late might meet drunken strangers, thieves, or even objects thrown carelessly from upper floors. Yes, object. Because one of the stranger hazards of walking through Roman streets at night came from above. Many apartment buildings had small windows or balconies where residents sometimes emptied waste or tossed unwanted items. Roman law technically required people to be careful about throwing things from windows, especially onto public streets. But accidents still happened. Scholars still debate how common these incidents were, yet several ancient sources mention them often enough that walking too close to buildings may not have been the safest choice. You instinctively step a little farther toward the center of the street as you continue walking. Better safe than sorry. Despite these occasional dangers, the city does not feel threatening tonight. Most residents are indoors, most lamps are already dim, and the patrols of the vigiles continue moving through nearby streets. Still, a few figures remain outside. Ahead of you, a man walks quickly with a lantern in one hand and a cloak pulled tightly around his shoulders. Perhaps he stayed at a friend's house longer than planned. Perhaps he worked late. Either way, he moves with purpose, clearly eager to reach home. Another figure appears farther down the road. A traveller guiding a small donkey carrying supplies. Travellers sometimes arrived at the city gates late in the evening, especially if their journey had been delayed during the day. Rome's massive size meant that people were constantly entering and leaving the city. Merchants, messengers, soldiers, pilgrims visiting temples. Even at night, the roads never completely emptied. You continue your walk toward a slightly wider street. Here the lamps are spaced farther apart, leaving deeper pockets of darkness between them. The silence is broken only by the distant sound of a cartwheel and the faint barking of a dog somewhere beyond the next building. The dog barks again, then stops. Animals often noticed nighttime movement, long before humans did. In Roman neighborhoods, dogs served as informal guards, alerting owners when strangers passed through the streets. You pause beside a doorway where a small lamp still burns. Inside the house, you hear a quiet conversation. Two voices speaking softly. Perhaps family members finishing a discussion before sleep. Perhaps friends sharing one last story before the night ends. Moments like this were common in Roman evenings, even after the city's public spaces quieted. Private homes continued their own small rhythms, a lamp burning beside a bed, a letter being written, a final cup of watered wine. But outside, the city grows steadily darker. Many lamps have already been extinguished to save oil. Oil was valuable, and wasting it through the night was unnecessary once everyone had gone to bed. You glance up toward the tall apartment buildings surrounding the street. Most windows are now black, only a few still glow faintly. Somewhere above you, a window creaks open briefly. A person leans out, glances toward the street, and then closes the shutters again. The night feels deeper now, colder and quieter. You realize that Rome has almost reached its final stage of evening, the stage where nearly everyone is asleep, where even the watch patrols walk slowly and speak quietly to avoid disturbing the city. Yet even during these quiet hours, a few gentle sounds remain. Water trickling through fountains, wind brushing softly against hanging lanterns, the slow footsteps of a guard crossing a distant street. Rome, even in its calmest moment, never becomes completely silent. It simply breathes, more slowly, and as you continue walking beneath the dim lamps and the wide ancient sky, the city around you settles further into rest. Soon, only dreams will fill the houses of Rome. But before sleep fully takes over the city, there are still a few final moments left in the Roman evening. Quiet conversations, private reflections, and the soft preparations that lead toward the night's rest. The streets are nearly empty now. You walk slowly through the dim glow of the remaining oil lamps, noticing how different Rome feels compared to the busy hours earlier in the evening. The loud voices are gone, the music has faded. Even the wagons that once rattled through the streets have mostly disappeared. But inside many homes, small moments of life are still unfolding. You pass a narrow doorway where a faint lamp glows through a thin curtain. The light flickers gently, revealing the outline of two people sitting close together inside. Their voices are quiet, private. Even though the great city of Rome is enormous, evenings often created small islands of intimacy like this. Roman relationships were shaped by many social customs. Marriages were often arranged between families, especially among wealthier households where alliances and social status mattered greatly. Yet affection and companionship still existed within these structures. Couples might spend the evening talking, quietly after the household had settled, sharing stories about the day, discussing family matters, or simply enjoying a rare moment of calm together. Scholars still debate how romantic Roman marriages truly were, but surviving letters between husbands and wives sometimes reveal surprisingly warm and personal emotions. You continue along the street, where another window still glows above. Inside, a man sits at a small table with a piece of wax tablet in front of him. He holds a stylus and slowly scratches words into the soft surface. Writing letters at night was common for those who could read and write. The wax tablet allowed messages to be written, erased, and rewritten easily before being copied onto papyrus for delivery. Perhaps he is writing to a friend in another city. Perhaps he is recording business notes for the next day, or perhaps he is simply organizing his thoughts before sleep. Across the street, another quiet moment unfolds. A young couple walks slowly beneath the dim street lamps. Their pace is relaxed, unhurried. They speak softly as they move through the quiet road, occasionally glancing upward at the stars. Even in ancient Rome, evening strolls were one of the simplest ways to enjoy time together. The cooler air after sunset made walking far more comfortable than during the hot afternoon hours. You continue your walk as they disappear around the corner. Ahead, a small courtyard opens between several apartment buildings. Here, a few neighbors still sit outside. One older man leans against a wooden chair while telling a long story. His voice rises and falls slowly as the others listen. Stories were one of the oldest forms of evening entertainment. Without modern media, stories passed from person to person across generations. Some were myths about gods and heroes. Others were personal memories or exaggerated tales of travel. Tonight, the storyteller seems to be describing a journey he once took along the coast of Italy. The listeners occasionally interrupt with questions or laughter. The small group sits comfortably beneath a single, hanging lamp. The scene feels peaceful, almost timeless. You move quietly past them and continue along the street. Above you, the stars seem even brighter now. The sky over ancient Rome, free from modern light pollution, would have been breathtaking on clear nights like this. Romans recognized many constellations inherited from earlier Greek astronomy. They connected these star patterns with myths, stories about heroes, monsters, and gods placed among the heavens. The constellation Orion, for example, was associated with the legendary hunter. Another cluster of stars represented the Great Bear. Scholars still debate how widely astronomical knowledge spread among ordinary Romans, but the presence of these myths in popular culture suggests that many people recognized at least some of the constellations. You pause briefly in the center of the street and look upward. The night feels calm. A breeze moves softly through the alleyways. Somewhere, in the distance, a watchman's lantern glows faintly as he turns a corner. The city feels peaceful now, but not completely asleep. In a few homes, lamps still burn as families finish their final conversations. In others, quiet prayers are whispered before bed, and in a handful of places, late-night letters or personal reflections continue under the gentle flicker of oil light. These quiet moments form the final layer of Rome's evening life. The loud parts of the day, markets, debates, performances, have already ended. Now, the city belongs to softer things. Conversation, reflection, rest. You begin walking again through the peaceful street. Your footsteps echo softly against the stones. Behind you, the quiet courtyard fades into darkness as its final lamp is extinguished. Rome is drifting steadily towards sleep. Soon the last lights will fade. Soon even the watch patrols will slow their rounds, and soon the entire city will rest beneath the same silent sky. But before the night fully settles, a few final sounds still linger in the great city of Rome. You continue along the quiet street, your footsteps echoing softly against the stone road. By now, most of Rome is asleep, but in a few homes the lamps still glow faintly, holding on to the final moments of the evening. In one small house, a family has gathered near the last burning oil lamp. The room is simple, a low table, a few stools, and a woven mat spread across the floor. The children sit close together while an older woman leans forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. She is telling a story. Stories were one of the oldest traditions in Roman households. Long before written books became widely available, stories were passed from generation to generation through spoken words. Tonight's story seems familiar. The woman describes a brave hero traveling across the sea, facing monsters and storms while trying to return home. The children listen carefully, their eyes wide in the lamplight. Perhaps it is a story about Odysseus, the legendary Greek hero whose adventures were well known throughout the Roman world. Roman culture borrowed many myths and legends from Greece, adapting them into their own traditions. Stories of heroes, gods, and magical creatures filled the imaginations of both children and adults. The woman pauses dramatically before describing the next part of the tale. One child gasps quietly, another leans forward even closer, even after. A long day, stories had the power to keep listeners awake just a little longer. Across the street, another household shares a different kind of evening conversation. Two men sit beside a small lamp, discussing news from the city. One of them mentions a recent announcement about repairs to a road outside Rome. Public construction projects were common in Roman society. Roads, aqueducts, temples, and public buildings constantly required maintenance. These projects often provided work for laborers while improving the infrastructure of the empire. Scholars still debate how efficiently Roman cities managed these projects, but the surviving roads and aqueducts suggest their engineers achieved remarkable success. The men continue their discussion quietly. Their voices are calm now, slower than the animated debates that filled the streets earlier in the evening. Fatigue from the long day is beginning to settle in. You move along the street, passing another building where a faint sound drifts through the window. Music again, a soft flute melody played slowly and gently. Perhaps someone practicing quietly before bed. Music had many roles in Roman life: performances, celebrations, religious ceremonies, and simple relaxation. The soft notes float through the night air before fading behind you as you continue walking. Nearby, a father sits beside his young son near the doorway of their home. The boy holds a small wooden toy, a carved animal that rolls across the floor when pushed. The father watches patiently as the child plays with the toy one last time before bedtime. Roman children had toys made from wood, clay, or bone. Small dolls, animal figures, miniature carts. Archaeologists have discovered many of these objects in ancient homes, reminding us that childhood in the ancient world included moments of play just like today. The father gently reminds the boy that it is time to sleep. Reluctantly, the child sets the toy aside and stands up. Inside the house, bedding has already been prepared. Roman beds were often simple wooden frames with woven supports and mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers depending on the household's wealth. The lamp inside the home burns a little lower now. Soon it will be extinguished. You continue your walk beneath the dark sky. The stars overhead seem even brighter now that almost every lamp in the city has gone out. The streets feel calm, peaceful. A distant fountain trickles quietly. A light breeze moves through the narrow alleyways. The great city of Rome, home to hundreds of thousands of people, is finally settling into rest. Yet even now, a few final voices still whisper inside homes. Stories finishing, conversations ending, parents wishing their children good night. These quiet endings mark the final stage of the Roman evening. The lively gatherings, bustling markets, and busy bathhouses of earlier hours now feel like distant memories. Night has taken hold of the city. Soon the last lamps will fade completely. Soon even the watch patrols will walk more slowly, their lanterns the only moving lights left in the streets, and soon the entire city will rest beneath the silent sky. But before sleep fully claims Rome, a few families are still making their final preparations for the night. Beds being arranged, lamps being extinguished, doors being closed against the darkness. The final rituals of the Roman evening are about to begin. The night has grown deep now. You walk slowly through the nearly silent streets of Rome, noticing how the city feels softer than before. The bright conversations of earlier hours are gone. The music has stopped. Even the taverns that once glowed with laughter have finally closed their doors. Most Romans are now inside their homes, preparing for sleep. You pass another apartment, building, its entrance dimly lit by a small oil lamp. Inside, the narrow stairway winds upward into darkness. Somewhere above, you hear quiet footsteps as someone climbs the stairs carrying bedding. In the crowded insular buildings, nighttime routines required a bit of careful organization. Living spaces were small, so beds were often moved or arranged each evening. Some households stored bedding during the day to create more room for daily activities. Now, as the night settles in, mattresses stuffed with straw or wool are spread across wooden frames or simple platforms. You step quietly past a doorway where a family is finishing these preparations. Mother gently shakes out a woven blanket while two children climb onto their bed, still whispering to each other about the story they heard earlier. Their father stands nearby, adjusting the wick of the oil lamp so the flame burns smaller. Oil was valuable. Letting a lamp burn brightly through the entire night would waste precious fuel. Instead, many Romans dimmed the flame or extinguished it completely once everyone was settled. The father finally blows softly across the lamp. The flame flickers, once, twice, and disappears. The room falls into darkness. You continue down the street. One by one, other homes follow the same routine. Lamps grow dim, shutters close, doors latch quietly. The sounds of the city become softer with every passing moment. Nearby, you hear someone pulling a wooden bolt across a door from the inside. Security was an important part of the nighttime routine. Although Rome had watch patrols, most families still locked their doors carefully before sleep. Some homes even kept small guard dogs inside to alert the household if strangers approached during the night. You glance upward toward the apartment windows above you. Earlier in the evening, many of them glowed warmly with lamplight. Now, most are dark. Only a few scattered lights remain across the neighborhood. The sky above is clear and full of stars. Without modern electric lighting, the Roman night sky would have appeared incredibly vivid. Constellations stretch across the darkness like patterns drawn across the heavens. Some Romans studied these stars carefully. Astrologers believed that the movements of planets and stars could influence human life. They created charts predicting fortunes, disasters, or important events based on celestial patterns. Scholars still debate how seriously ordinary Romans trusted these predictions, but astrology was certainly popular throughout the empire. You continue walking slowly beneath the quiet sky. A faint breeze moves through the street, carrying the distant sound of water flowing from a fountain. The city feels calm, almost peaceful. But even now, a few small sounds remind you that Rome never becomes completely silent. Somewhere nearby, a baby begins crying briefly before being comforted. A dog barks once and then settles again, and in the distance you hear the soft footsteps of a night patrol moving along another street. The vigiles continue their rounds, their lanterns glide slowly through the darkness, checking for fires or trouble while the rest of the city sleeps. You pause near a small courtyard where a single lamp still burns beside a doorway. An elderly man sits quietly on a wooden stool. He seems to be enjoying the cool night air before, finally, heading inside. Perhaps this is his nightly habit. Some people simply liked sitting outside for a few extra minutes after everyone else had gone to bed. The calm silence of late night could feel comforting after the noise of the busy day. Eventually, the man stands slowly and lifts the lamp. He steps inside his home. The door closes behind him. The courtyard becomes dark. You continue walking through the sleeping city. Now the streets are almost completely empty. Your footsteps echo gently against the stones. The air feels cooler, the sky feels wider, and Rome, the enormous city that roared with life during the day, now rests quietly beneath the stars. Only a handful of lamps remain across the rooftops. Soon, even those will disappear. Soon the city will reach its deepest moment of rest. But before the night fully settles into silence, there are still a few faint sounds drifting through the darkness. The final echoes of life in ancient Rome before sleep takes hold. The night has now reached its quietest hour. You walk slowly through the nearly empty streets, noticing how the great city of Rome feels completely different from the bustling world you saw earlier. During the day, these roads were crowded with merchants, carts, animals, and thousands of people moving in every direction. Now, there is space. The stone road stretches ahead of you beneath the faint glow of a few remaining lamps. Most homes are dark, most conversations have ended, even the taverns and bathhouses that filled the evening with life are now closed and silent. Yet Rome is never entirely still. A faint sound echoes in the distance. Wheels. You pause for a moment, listening. Soon the source appears at the far end of the street. A wagon slowly rolling across the stones. The driver sits bundled in a cloak against the cool night air, while two mules pull the cart forward. As the wagon approaches, its wheels rattle loudly against the uneven road. This was one of the sounds that many Romans associated with late-night hours. Because of heavy daytime traffic restrictions, large delivery carts were often allowed to travel more freely during the night. Merchants used these quieter hours to move goods across the city: food, construction materials, supplies for markets that would reopen in the morning. The wagon passes you slowly. The driver nods briefly before continuing down the street. Soon the sound fades again into the distance. Ancient writer Juvenal famously complained about this exact noise, saying the rumble of wagons made it nearly impossible to sleep in Rome. Perhaps he had a point. You continue walking. The quiet returns. From somewhere nearby comes another sound, a dog barking. It echoes through the alley for a moment before stopping. Suddenly, dogs played an important role in Roman homes, often serving as guards during the night. Their barking warned residents if someone approached the house or moved through the street outside. You turn a corner and arrive at a small square. In the center, a fountain flows continuously, the gentle sound of water filling the still night air. Moonlight reflects off the surface of the basin, creating small ripples of silver light. Public fountains like this operated day and night. Rome's aqueduct system carried water from distant hills into the city, feeding fountains, baths, and private homes. The engineering behind these aqueducts was one of Rome's greatest achievements. Some stretched for dozens of miles, delivering fresh water through carefully designed channels that relied only on gravity. Scholars still marvel at how accurately Roman engineers calculated the gentle slopes required to keep water flowing steadily over such long distances. You lean briefly against the stone edge of the fountain. The water is cool to the touch, the night air is calm. For a moment, the city feels almost peaceful enough to forget how enormous it really is. But even now, a few quiet movements continue. Across the square, a watch patrol passes slowly. Their lanterns swing gently as they walk. The vigiles speak quietly to one another while continuing their nightly rounds. They pause near the fountain, checking the surrounding buildings before moving on again. The faint glow of their lanterns drifts across the square before disappearing down another street. You remain standing there for a moment longer. Above you, the sky is full of stars. Without electric lights, the night sky over Rome would have been breathtakingly clear. The Milky Way stretches faintly across the darkness, and the familiar constellations shine brightly above the rooftops. Many Romans believed the heavens reflected the order of the universe. Philosophers studied the stars, trying to understand how the cosmos worked. Astrologers believed planetary movements could influence events on Earth. Others simply admired the beauty of the night sky. You begin walking again. The city feels almost completely asleep now. Most doors are closed, most lamps are extinguished. The occasional flicker of a lantern marks the path of a late traveler or a night watchman, but otherwise the streets belong to silence. Soon even these faint movements will disappear. Soon the great city of Rome will reach its deepest moment of rest before the first light of morning begins to appear. But for now, the night remains calm and still. The final sounds of the Roman evening, the cartwheels, the barking dogs, the whisper of water in fountains, drift gently through the darkness. And beneath the endless sky of stars, the ancient city finally rests.